Well, it was maybe not that extreme. It was they took over an Icelandic bank called the Heritable Bank in London. But what it did, it dried up the credit lines to Iceland and loan lines. So everybody had to fork up cash during a time of complete financial meltdown.
But that's what it said, that in some cases people couldn't even get their money out for a while, though.
Yeah. Everything was blocked. Students and people from Iceland living abroad could not get money out of their internet banks and so forth. So they had to either starve or rely on friends and family if they had any in the area. But it also created a very difficult paradox, because the Social Democratic Party that is in power now in Iceland have just one dream, and that is to join the European Union. So within all of this turmoil, they decided, let's apply for an application or to join the UA.
Yeah, that's key. Just like Greece 10 years ago, you've got to go into debt and sign the deals with these bankers as part of their rules to get into the EU.
Mm-hmm. Well, also how they basically used it, the UK and the Netherlands governments basically blackmailed us with the EU application as well. They said, we will not support your EU application unless you decide to drop going to court over iSafe, and unless you just choose to, you're going to have to either choose to become isolated, become, North Cuba or Cuba of the North, or do as we tell you. And that is, they went even so far as wanting to make a hell of a lot of money out of us by giving us, forcing us to pay huge interest on this. So, but we managed to stop that. And right now I am in a committee of the leadership working on finding a solution to this. And I find it completely unacceptable that the Icelandic nation will take on any burden from this ordeal.
Birgitta Jonsdottier, a member of the Icelandic Parliament, continuing. So let's move up to the referendum. What did the referendum state? It passed by over 90%. As you just told us, this is completely freaking the bankers out, because if countries realize this has been done by fraud and that it's a Madoff scheme and that the money's not owed, the next step is talking about prosecuting the bankers that Ron Paul and others are talking about in this country.
Well, the interesting thing and really disturbing thing about the bankers in Iceland, or the Icelandic bankers, is that none of their assets have been frozen. Most of them are living in London, and as many people know, London is ranked among the 5th best tax havens in the world. So they're actually getting back their companies. They're getting back their power and a lot of write-offs, and that is making a lot of people very upset and angry.
Okay, to be clear, flesh that out. The bankers that sold you out in your own country, most of them don't even live in your country, and the banks know that they're their minions, so they're staying in power.
Yeah, I mean, they lost the banks, but they haven't lost their companies. So, I mean, one of the oligarchs, Icelandic oligarchs, he owns the biggest independent media outlet in Iceland. So you can imagine what sort of news you're getting from that outlet.
But the good news is 90+% vote against him. It shows it's not working. But that's what they always have. Brokerage firms. They separately run banks. They get the taxpayers' money. They move the money out into their own accounts. Then they implode it and try to take over the nation. But you've checkmated them.
Well, for now, yes, definitely. And I guess, I don't know, it actually surprised me that the president of Iceland decided to listen to the nation. But there was a huge petition. More than 60,000 Icelanders called on him to allow us to have this national referendum. And it was interesting. There was actually some documents leaked from the U.S. Embassy in Iceland, in Reykjavik, Iceland, and I found it on WikiLeaks.org, and it was interesting how the British and the U.S. Treasury were very much interested in doing everything in their power to stop the national referendum. And then the same thing applied to, I got some information that, I don't know if you're familiar with the Paris Club, but they were very keen on stopping this national referendum because especially in Europe, they're very much afraid that, like Greece and Ireland, the people there will demand to have a national referendum about the situation in their countries.
Oh, this is big. This is huge. I mean, the magnitude of this, sending the message that this is fraud, we're not paying it. We're about to go to break, but start telling us about the documents and the Paris Club and how the banks don't like what's happened in Iceland.
And the Paris Club cartel is a very interesting club. It is sort of a secret club run out of Paris with some of the most powerful nations in the world, and they determine the interest rates on nations that have debt moratorium. And apparently it is the case of Iceland, and that national referendum has been discussed in that club. I did a research trying to figure out who is in the club, who attended the meetings, and it is impossible to find any information, at least on the internet. So I would actually call on, if anybody that's listening to this has any information about the Paris Club, please provide me with that information.
We'll give your email out before you leave. A lot more coming up with a member of the Icelandic Parliament. It's a mind game. Can the Ken Lay, Bernie Madoff types that are running the international banking scam take over the planet, set up a bank of the world that you pay all your carbon taxes to? That's being announced. Can they make Spain, the U.S., England, Iceland, Argentina, Nigeria pay 30+% compounded interest on fraudulent crud they created and sold to governments? Why aren't they going bankrupt? Why aren't they being arrested for the fraud? Why aren't countries saying, no, we're not going to give in to your financial terrorism? Now, they told Iceland they would destroy them in the last year if they didn't capitulate and basically become debt slaves to these people in perpetuity. Iceland had a referendum. 93% said no over the weekend. And one of the ladies who came from nowhere, just like you can do as citizens around the world, with the truth, founded a party, is the leader of it. One of the main groups that got this done is Birgitta Jonsdottier, joining us from Iceland. And we'll give you her email and website before she leaves us later in the hour so that you can send her any intel, because we're all working together on this. We'll talk about some other initiatives in Iceland, it being a beacon, a hub of freedom. So tell us about the threats, what led up to the referendum, what the referendum states, and now where you go from here.
Well, what led to the referendum was that basically we had a contract made between the nations last summer. And it was so bad that the parliament actually had to spend 2 or 3 months making amendments to it in order for it to be safe for us to pass it. And it still had that incredibly high interest and so forth, but we did put some roof on the payment in accordance with GDP. So if there was no growth in Iceland, then we wouldn't pay anything during those years. However, it was extremely bad, and we're still paying 5.5 interest.
Which compounds.
But what happened?
Go ahead.
5.5% interest on it. So just paying the interest would have, they're like, okay, so 317,000 people in Iceland, 80,000 Icelandic taxpayers would have be paying only the interest of this iSafe deal.
And that's the same model they used in all these other countries, third world countries, where you'll have $1 billion loan backed by nothing from the IMF or World Bank to, say, Nigeria, and then 20 years later, they owe 50-something billion on $1 billion.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
And the thing is that the IMF, which is supposed to be, an institute, something that all nations that are part of it pay into every year, and it's supposed to not to be interfering in between states or between countries. But the British, and they are a big shareholder in it, and they have been using it as, to blackmail us into submission. And that upset Icelanders tremendously, because most Icelanders are not very happy or keen to be in an IMF program to begin with, because being an IMF program means that there is a complete erosion of everything that we know as a welfare system. And before all of this, we had a very good educational system, very good healthcare. Everybody had the same access to healthcare. I would get the same doctor as the president without paying anything. So we fear that all of that is going to be lost if we don't stand up to these forces we're dealing with. And I put a proposal in Parliament last week about finding a plan B to get rid of the IMF, because there's a lot of fantastic experts, economists like Joseph Stiglitz and many more who have offered to help us find a solution that would be different than...
And he said the banks are engaging in criminal activity and the Federal Reserve is destroying America. He's a Nobel Prize winner, for those who don't know.